Saipan, June 17, 1944, 0600 hours, and Lieutenant Colonel Takashi Hirakushi of the Imperial Japanese Army's 43rd Infantry Division crouched in his command bunker overlooking the American beachhead positions, studying the Marine lines through his field glasses when the morning air cracked with a single rifle shot, and his adjutant Captain Yamada standing barely 3 feet away collapsed with a perfectly centered hole through his forehead, the back of his skull, erupting in a spray of blood and brain matter that splattered across the bunker's coral wall. Yet no muzzle flash had been visible anywhere along the Marine positions nearly 800 yards distant. No telltale smoke, no movement, nothing that would indicate where death had come from. And as Hirakushi dropped to the bunker floor, pressing himself against the rough coral surface while more of his staff officers scrambled for cover, he could not comprehend how the Americans had made such an impossible shot at this range, completely unaware that Marine Scout Sniper Corporal Daniel Maddox was actually positioned on a ridge 1,100 yards away, watching through his 8-power unertl scope mounted on an M1903A1 Springfield rifle, already working the bolt to chamber another 30-06 round while his spotter confirmed the kill through his binoculars. The Japanese military establishment had entered the Pacific War supremely confident in their marksmen's abilities. Having trained their snipers at the Army Infantry School at Toyama, where they learned to engage targets at ranges of 300 to 500 meters with their Type 97 sniper rifles fitted with 2.5-power telescopic sights, believing this represented the pinnacle of long-range precision shooting, and their doctrine emphasized concealment and patience over extreme distance engagement, with Japanese snipers trained to tie themselves into trees, burrow into spider holes, and wait for American patrols to pass within their limited effective range before opening fire. A tactical approach that had served them adequately in China and during the early victories against colonial forces in Southeast Asia. The Imperial Japanese Navy had similar confidence in their Special Naval Landing Forces designated marksmen, who carried Type 99 rifles with 4 power scopes, considering 400 meters to be extreme range for precision shooting, and neither service branch possessed any institutional knowledge or warning about American sniper capabilities that would soon terrorize their forces across every island battlefield from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. Colonel Kiyoshi Ichiki, commanding the 28th Infantry Regiment during the first major ground offensive against the Marines on Guadalcanal in August 1942, had received intelligence reports from naval headquarters suggesting the American defenders were poorly equipped, demoralized, and using outdated World War I surplus rifles that would be no match for Japanese infantry tactics, completely unaware that select Marines were already deployed with National Match M1903A1 rifles, fitted with sophisticated unertl scopes that had been developed from decades of competitive long-range shooting experience at Camp Perry, where Marine teams had dominated the 1,000-yard firing lines using these same precision instruments that could reliably group shots within a 10-inch circle at ranges that Japanese military doctrine considered impossible for infantry weapons. The unertl scope itself represented a quantum leap in optical technology that Japanese forces never truly understood, featuring an 8-power magnification with external adjustment knobs providing precise windage and elevation corrections in quarter-minute clicks, allowing trained Marine snipers to compensate for wind drift, bullet drop, and even the Coriolis effect at extreme ranges, capabilities that simply did not exist in any Japanese military optical sight. When Private First Class Masao Watanabe of the 2nd Sendai Division encountered Marine sniper fire for the first time in the jungle ridges above Henderson Field on Guadalcanal in October 1942, he wrote in his diary that death came from nowhere, describing how Lieutenant Sato had been addressing their platoon about the upcoming night infiltration when his head suddenly snapped backward, a red mist hanging in the humid air where his face had been, the crack of the rifle reaching them. A full 2 seconds after the officer fell, and as the platoon scattered into the jungle undergrowth, Watanabe could not understand how the Americans could even see them through the dense canopy, let alone deliver such precise fire from distances their own rifles could barely reach. Not knowing that Marine sniper teams had spent weeks studying Japanese movement patterns, identifying the trails their officers used, the clearings where they held formations, establishing shooting positions with clear lanes of fire at ranges of 700 to 900 yards where the unertl-equipped M1903A1 rifles could deliver instant death while remaining far beyond the effective range of any Japanese weapon. The M1903A1 rifle that terrorized Japanese forces throughout the Pacific Campaign had originally been developed for competitive shooting, built on the proven Springfield action with a star-gauged barrel that guaranteed exceptional accuracy, fitted with match-grade triggers adjusted to a crisp 4-pound pull, and equipped with carefully selected walnut stocks that had been bedded and fitted by marine armorers at the Philadelphia Naval Depot to ensure consistent accuracy even in the harsh tropical conditions of the Pacific Theater, specifications that meant nothing to Japanese intelligence officers, who continued to insist American rifles were inferior to Japanese weapons even as their casualty reports showed officer after officer killed by single, precisely placed shots from distances their own snipers could never attempt. The unertl scope mounted on these rifles had been specifically requested by the Marine Corps Equipment Board after extensive testing showed it maintained zero even after the violent recoil of sustained firing, unlike the delicate Japanese scopes that required constant readjustment, and the unique sliding mount system allowed the scope to move rearward under recoil, protecting the precision optics while maintaining the exact point of aim when pulled back into battery position for the next shot. Major General Kyote Kawaguchi, commanding the 35th Infantry Brigade during the September 1942 offensive against Bloody Ridge on Guadalcanal, lost 17 officers above the rank of lieutenant to sniper fire in 3 days of fighting, including his operations officer Major Tanaka, who was shot through the throat while studying a map at what they believed was a safe distance behind their forward positions, nearly 1,000 yards from the nearest known Marine positions on Edson's Ridge. The fatal shot, delivered by Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell Barnes using an M1903A1 with an unertl scope, who had infiltrated forward of Marine lines before dawn, established a concealed position on a coral outcropping that gave him commanding views of Japanese assembly areas, and proceeded to systematically execute every officer he could identify through his 8-power scope, using the samurai swords they wore as identification markers, engaging targets at ranges of 800 to 1,100 yards with such precision that surviving Japanese officers began removing all rank insignia and distinguishing equipment, trying desperately to blend in with common soldiers to avoid the attention of invisible death that seemed to reach out from impossible distances. The psychological impact of Marine sniper operations on Japanese forces exceeded even the significant tactical damage, as testified by Lieutenant Commander Ishikawa of the Yokosuka 7th Special Naval Landing Force, who survived the Tarawa assault in November 1943, later writing in his post-war memoir that the Americans possessed demon eyes that could see through walls and jungle, killing at distances that defied understanding, describing how his unit's advance across the airfield had stalled not from machine gun fire or mortars, but from the paralyzing fear that gripped his sailors when their petty officers began dropping one by one, neat holes appearing in their foreheads or chests, no sound except the distant crack of a rifle so far away it seemed impossible it could be connected to the deaths occurring around them, forcing the survivors to crawl on their bellies for hundreds of meters because standing upright meant instant death from an enemy they could neither see nor engage, completely unaware that Marine scout snipers had positioned themselves on the pier and in the damaged control tower, some nearly 1,200 yards from the airfield, using their unertl scopes to pick off Japanese leaders with the same methodical precision they had learned on the known distance ranges at Camp Pendleton. Captain Sakai Oba, who led the famous holdout resistance on Saipan for months after the island fell, recorded in his hidden journal that the greatest fear among his men was not the Marine infantry or their tanks but the ghost shooters who killed from beyond the clouds, referencing the Marine snipers whose shots came from such extreme ranges that Japanese soldiers created supernatural explanations for deaths they could not comprehend within their understanding of military weapons, with some believing the Americans had developed a new type of death ray or invisible projectile, not knowing that Marine snipers like Corporal Robert Holmes had spent weeks perfecting their holds for the unique atmospheric conditions of Saipan, adjusting for the constant trade winds, the shimmer of heat rising from the coral rock, the way humidity affected bullet trajectory at extreme range, allowing them to consistently engage Japanese targets at distances exceeding 1,000 yards with their M1903A1 rifles and unertl scopes, a combination that delivered a 2,800 feet per second muzzle velocity with match-grade ammunition that maintained lethal energy even at these extended ranges. The Japanese military's complete ignorance of American sniper capabilities stemmed partly from their intelligence service's failure to recognize the significance of Marine marksmanship traditions that dated back to the Banana Wars and interventions in Central America, where Marine officers like Captain George Van Orden had begun developing advanced sniper tactics and equipment requirements that would eventually lead to the adoption of the unertl-equipped M1903A1 as the premier sniper system of World War II, a weapon system that had been tested and refined through years of competitive shooting at ranges that Japanese military doctrine considered wasteful and impractical. focusing instead on close-range individual marksmanship that emphasized spiritual determination over technological superiority, a philosophical approach that left Japanese forces completely unprepared for the reality of facing an enemy who could deliver precision fire at ranges where Japanese soldiers could barely see their targets, let alone engage them effectively. Colonel Tadashi Suzuki of the 31st Army Intelligence Section on Saipan had dismissed early reports of American sniper effectiveness as exaggerations from demoralized troops, insisting that confirmed kills at 800 meters or beyond were physically impossible with infantry rifles, maintaining this position even after personally witnessing Major Yoshida killed by a single shot while inspecting fortifications on Mount Tepopale, the fatal bullet arriving from Marine positions on the opposite ridge nearly 900 yards away, and only after capturing Marine equipment during a failed night infiltration did Suzuki finally examine an M1903A1 rifle with its unertl scope, staring in disbelief at the sophisticated external adjustment turrets, the fine crosshair reticle, the quality of the optics that made targets appear crystal clear at ranges where Japanese scopes showed only blurry shadows, finally understanding why so many Japanese officers had died without ever seeing their killers, realizing with growing horror that every Japanese position on Saipan was within range of these weapons. The Marine Scout sniper platoons that deployed across the Pacific represented a revolution in military marksmanship that Japanese forces never successfully countered. Teams like the famous 40 Thieves on Saipan led by Lieutenant Frank Tuchovsky, who employed their M1903A1 rifles with unertl scopes not just for long-range precision killing but as psychological weapons that paralyzed Japanese operations, forcing officers to conduct all planning in deep bunkers, preventing daylight movement of supplies, making it impossible for Japanese units to concentrate forces without suffering devastating losses to their leadership, and creating an atmosphere of constant terror where death could arrive from any direction at any moment without warning. A reality that Lieutenant Hiroshi Kobayashi of the 136th Infantry Regiment described in a letter never sent to his family, writing that the Americans had stolen the warrior's honor from combat, killing from distances where no samurai could respond, turning war into mere mathematics and optics rather than a test of spiritual strength. The technical superiority of the M1903A1 rifle system extended beyond just the precision of its star-gauged barrel or the clarity of the unertl optics, encompassing details that Japanese ordnance officers only discovered through captured equipment late in the war, such as the match-grade ammunition specifically manufactured for sniper use featuring Sierra boat tail bullets that maintained velocity and stability at extreme ranges, the specially selected brass cases that ensured consistent chamber pressures, the precise powder charges weighed to within 1/10 of a grain for uniformity, creating a weapon system where every component had been optimized for accuracy at distances that Japanese military science considered theoretical rather than practical. And even when Japanese forces finally understood the technical capabilities they faced, they lacked both the industrial capacity and the institutional knowledge to develop comparable systems, leaving their forces perpetually vulnerable to Marine snipers who continued to refine their techniques with each island campaign. Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock would later perfect these same techniques in Vietnam using a Winchester Model 70 with an 8-power unertl scope nearly identical to those used in World War II. But the foundation of Marine sniper supremacy had been established on the coral ridges and jungle peaks of the Pacific Islands, where men like Sergeant John Bassilone's sniper support team on Guadalcanal had demonstrated that precise long-range rifle fire could shape entire battles, killing Japanese machine gun crews at ranges where they felt safely beyond American reach, eliminating artillery observers before they could direct counter-battery fire, destroying the Japanese tactical advantage of infiltration and night fighting by removing their leadership before attacks could develop, capabilities that Colonel Toshinari Shoji commanding the 230th Infantry Regiment reported to General Hyakutake as unprecedented in modern warfare, describing American sniper fire as reaching out like the hand of death itself to pluck away Japan's best officers and sergeants with supernatural accuracy. The M1903A1 rifles themselves became objects of fearful fascination among Japanese troops, who managed to examine captured or abandoned examples, with Private Kenji Yamamoto of the 17th Army writing in his diary about finding a dead Marine sniper on Bougainville, describing the rifle as impossibly long and heavy, the scope appearing more like a surveyor's instrument than a weapon sight, counting the clicks as he turned the adjustment knobs, not understanding that each click moved the point of impact exactly 1/4 minute of angle, allowing trained Marine snipers to make precise corrections for range and wind that would place a .30 caliber bullet exactly where they wanted it at distances exceeding 1,000 yards, a level of precision that seemed like sorcery to Japanese soldiers trained to rely on Kentucky windage and instinct rather than mathematical calculation, and Yamamoto noted with particular amazement the quality of the rifle's construction. The smooth action of the bolt, the perfect inletting of the stock. Details that spoke of an industrial infrastructure and precision manufacturing capability that Japan could never match even before the war's devastation of their production facilities. Lieutenant Colonel Masashi Ogawa, serving as operations officer for the 5th Base Force on Tarawa, survived the 76-hour battle to provide one of the few senior Japanese perspectives on Marine sniper operations during that devastating defeat, testifying during post-war interrogations that American sniper fire had effectively decapitated Japanese command structure within the first 24 hours of fighting, describing how Admiral Shibasaki and his entire staff had been killed when they attempted to move between command posts, picked off one by rifle fire from distances that seemed impossible, forcing subordinate commanders to operate without coordination or intelligence, unable to mass forces for counterattacks without exposing themselves to precision fire that never missed. And Ogawa particularly noted that American snipers seemed to possess an uncanny ability to identify Japanese officers even when they had removed all rank insignia, as if the telescopic sights could peer into a man's soul and identify leadership qualities, not realizing that Marine snipers had been trained to recognize authority through body language, positioning, the way other soldiers deferred to certain individuals, subtle indicators that became obvious when magnified 8 times through an unearthly scope. The Battle of Peleliu in September 1944 demonstrated the evolution of Marine sniper tactics against Japanese forces who had finally begun to understand the threat they faced, with Colonel Kunio Nakagawa ordering all his officers to wear enlisted uniforms, forbidding any gathering of more than 3 men in daylight, conducting all movements through covered trenches and tunnels, yet still losing 43% of his company-grade officers to sniper fire in the first week of fighting, as Marine scout snipers had adapted their techniques, using the superior optics of their unearthly scopes to identify targets through the smallest openings in Japanese fortifications, threading bullets through firing ports, ventilation slots, gaps between coral boulders, employing their M1903A1 rifles like surgical instruments to systematically dissect Japanese defensive positions from ranges where return fire was impossible, forcing Japanese troops to remain completely underground during daylight hours, unable to observe Marine movements, repair damaged positions, or coordinate defensive operations without risking instant death from a marksman hidden on a distant ridgeline. Master Sergeant Tetsuo Harada of the 14th Infantry Division's Sniper Section, one of the few Japanese snipers to survive Peleliu, provided detailed testimony about the impossibility of countering American sniper superiority, explaining that his Type 97 rifle with its 2.5 power scope could not even clearly identify targets at the ranges from which American snipers routinely engaged, describing attempts to locate Marine firing positions by sound that failed because the crack of the bullet arrived long before the sound of the shot, making it impossible to determine direction, and even when Japanese snipers managed to identify likely American positions, their rifles lacked both the range and accuracy to effectively engage, forcing them to wait helplessly for Marines to advance within 400 meters while suffering constant attrition from American marksmen operating at 3 times that distance, a technological mismatch that Harada compared to fighting modern rifles with matchlock muskets. The liberation of the Philippines witnessed Marine snipers employing their M1903A1 rifles with unearthly scopes in urban combat roles that Japanese doctrine had never anticipated, with Marine scout snipers positioning themselves in the ruins of Manila's government buildings, using their 8-power magnification to observe Japanese positions through windows and shell holes at distances exceeding 800 yards, coordinating with forward observers to direct artillery and mortar fire with unprecedented accuracy, and delivering precision shots that killed Japanese machine gunners through narrow embrasures, eliminated officers attempting to coordinate defensive positions, destroyed enemy snipers before they could engage advancing Marine infantry, creating a multilayered tactical advantage that Colonel Katsuji Yamamoto commanding the Manila Naval Defense Force described as facing an enemy who could see everything while remaining invisible, strike anywhere while remaining untouchable, turning urban warfare into a methodical execution rather than the close-quarters bloodbath Japanese forces had trained to exploit. The institutional knowledge that Marine snipers accumulated through the Pacific Campaign created an ever-widening capability gap that Japanese forces could never close, as lessons learned on Guadalcanal were refined on Tarawa, perfected on Saipan, and mastered on Iwo Jima, with each generation of scout snipers passing hard-won knowledge to their replacements about reading wind patterns over water versus land, compensating for the optical distortions caused by heat shimmer rising from coral sand, understanding how humidity affected bullet trajectory differently at sea level versus mountain ridges, the way tropical vegetation could deflect shots that would pass cleanly through temperate forest. Details that could only be learned through experience and carefully documented in after-action reports that built a comprehensive doctrine of precision long-range engagement in tropical conditions. Knowledge that Japanese forces lacked both the time and opportunity to develop as they fought a perpetual defensive retreat across the Pacific. Captain Sunio Endo of the 32nd Army Intelligence Section on Okinawa compiled one of the most comprehensive Japanese assessments of American sniper capabilities, based on interviews with survivors from previous island battles and analysis of captured marine equipment, concluding in a report to General Ushijima that American sniper superiority represented not just a technological advantage but a fundamental different philosophy of warfare, where individual marksmanship was elevated to an art form supported by unlimited resources, precise manufacturing, and scientific methodology that treated killing as an engineering problem rather than a spiritual endeavor, noting particularly that American snipers seemed to take pride in making impossible shots, engaging targets at ranges that served no tactical purpose other than demonstrating their complete dominance of the battlefield. Psychological warfare through precision that destroyed Japanese morale more effectively than any artillery barrage or bombing raid could achieve. The M1903A1 rifle with its unertl scope became so feared among Japanese forces that numerous supernatural beliefs developed around these weapons, with soldiers on Saipan reporting that American snipers could see through walls, shoot around corners, and kill men hiding in caves, beliefs that arose from incidents where Marine snipers had used their superior optics to observe Japanese movement patterns, predicting where targets would appear, positioning themselves to engage enemies the moment they exposed themselves, creating an illusion of omniscience that terrified Japanese troops who had no frame of reference for such capabilities, and some units began performing Shinto purification rituals before patrols, believing they faced supernatural forces rather than simply superior technology and training. A breakdown in military rationality that Lieutenant Yoshio Suzuki of the 9th Tank Regiment attributed directly to the psychological impact of sniper casualties that seemed to violate the natural laws of warfare as Japanese soldiers understood them. The production specifications of the M1903A1 rifles used by Marine snipers revealed an attention to detail that Japanese military industry could not match even before resource shortages crippled their manufacturing, with each rifle barrel individually tested for accuracy, those failing to group within specifications rejected for sniper use, stocks carefully selected from properly dried walnut with straight grain that would not warp in tropical humidity, actions hand fitted to ensure smooth operation without binding, triggers adjusted by skilled armorers to break cleanly without creep or over-travel, creating weapons that maintained their accuracy through thousands of rounds in conditions that quickly degraded Japanese rifles, and when combined with the unertl scope's precise adjustments and superior optics, produced a weapon system that could reliably deliver first-round hits at distances that Japanese forces continued to insist were impossible even as they buried more officers killed by these impossible shots. Private First Class Hiroshi Nakamura, serving with the 44th Independent Mixed Brigade on Iwo Jima, described in his final letter the terror of facing American snipers who seemed to possess supernatural patience and inhuman vision, writing that death came from the sky like divine judgment, striking down the brave and cowardly alike without distinction, making no allowance for courage or fear, reducing all men to targets in a telescope's lens. And Nakamura particularly noted the sound of American sniper shots, a sharp crack distinct from the boom of standard rifles, arriving after men had already fallen, as if death traveled faster than sound itself, not understanding that the high-velocity 30-06 rounds from M1903A1 rifles indeed reached their targets before the sound of the shot at extended ranges, creating the eerie effect of silent death followed by distant thunder that so unnerved Japanese troops who had no comparable experience from their training or previous combat. The 8-power magnification of the unertl scope provided Marine snipers with a decisive advantage in target identification and engagement that went far beyond simple range extension, allowing them to observe Japanese positions for hours, learning individual habits, identifying leaders through behavior rather than insignia, discovering hidden supply routes, communication trenches, and command posts that appeared perfectly camouflaged to the naked eye but became obvious when studied through high-quality optics, intelligence gathering that complemented the killing role, with scout sniper teams often spending more time observing and reporting than shooting, providing battalion and regimental commanders with detailed intelligence about Japanese dispositions that shaped operational planning. A dual role that Japanese military doctrine had never developed for their own snipers, who were seen purely as individual killers rather than reconnaissance assets. Corporal Yukio Tanaka of the Naval Guard Force on Tinian wrote one of the most detailed Japanese accounts of encountering Marine sniper fire, describing an attempted daylight reconnaissance where his 8-man patrol lost 5 members to sniper fire without ever seeing their attacker. Shots coming from somewhere beyond a cane field that stretched for nearly 1,000 yards. Each shot perfectly placed for instant kills, head or center chest. No wounded to slow the survivors, who eventually crawled back to Japanese lines on their bellies, pushing through the razor-sharp cane leaves for hours rather than risk standing upright for even seconds. And Tanaka noted with particular bitterness that the American sniper had deliberately allowed 3 members to survive, as if demonstrating that death or survival was entirely at his discretion. A display of dominance that shattered the morale of Tanaka's entire unit, who refused further daylight patrols, regardless of threatened punishment. The durability of the M1903A1 and unearthal scope combination under combat conditions surprised even Marine armorers who had expected the precision instruments to require constant maintenance in the harsh Pacific environment. Yet rifles that had been through months of jungle fighting on Guadalcanal maintained their zero. Scopes that had been subjected to tropical downpours, volcanic ash, and coral dust continued to provide clear sight pictures, the robust construction allowing Marine snipers to operate independently for extended periods without support, conducting long-range reconnaissance patrols deep in Japanese territory, living off captured rations, engaging targets of opportunity from hide sites that might be occupied for days. A level of operational independence that Japanese snipers tied to their units for ammunition resupply and orders could never achieve, creating an asymmetric threat that forced Japanese forces to dedicate disproportionate resources to counter sniper operations that rarely succeeded in eliminating the Marine marksman. Lieutenant Colonel Hideyoshi Obata, commanding the 3rd Battalion, 2nd Infantry Regiment on Guam, implemented the most comprehensive Japanese counter-sniper program of the Pacific War, training selected marksmen to hunt American snipers, developing elaborate deception plans using dummy officers to draw fire, even importing captured Soviet anti-tank rifles hoping their heavier bullets could match American range capabilities. Yet after 3 weeks of operations had not confirmed a single Marine sniper killed, while losing 12 of his own designated marksmen and numerous other casualties to long-range precision fire, leading Obata to conclude in his final report that American sniper superiority could not be countered with available Japanese resources, recommending that future operations simply accept sniper casualties as inevitable rather than waste resources on futile counter-sniper efforts. Admission of defeat that would have been unthinkable in the Japanese military before encountering the reality of Marine scout snipers armed with M1903A1 rifles and unearthal scopes. The training differential between Marine and Japanese snipers reflected fundamentally different military cultures, with Marines selected from proven competitive shooters who had already demonstrated exceptional marksmanship skills, then subjected to intensive additional training in ballistics, range estimation, camouflage, and observation techniques, learning to read wind not just at their position but along the entire trajectory of their bullet, understanding how barometric pressure, temperature, and humidity affected point of impact at different ranges, studying anatomy to know exactly where to place shots for instant incapacitation, developing the patience to wait hours or days for the perfect shot rather than engaging targets of opportunity. A scientific approach to killing that appalled Japanese officers who viewed such detailed technical training as contrary to the warrior spirit that should rely on intuition and courage rather than calculation and technology. The logistical support for Marine sniper operations represented another advantage Japanese forces could not match, with each scout sniper team supplied with match-grade ammunition manufactured to much tighter tolerances than standard ball rounds, cleaning equipment specifically designed for maintaining precision rifles, replacement parts pre-fitted to individual weapons, even specialized clothing and equipment for extended operations behind enemy lines, a level of support that seemed wastefully extravagant to Japanese commanders operating under severe resource constraints, unable to provide their own snipers with anything beyond standard infantry equipment and ammunition that might vary significantly in quality between production batches, forcing Japanese marksmen to constantly re-zero their rifles and adjust for ammunition inconsistencies, while Marine snipers could rely on uniform ballistic performance from every round they fired. Major Masao Murayama, commanding the 2nd Sendai Division during the October offensive on Guadalcanal, reported losing more officers to sniper fire than all other causes combined during the assault on Henderson Field, writing in his after-action report that American marksmen had turned the jungle into a killing field where no movement was safe, no position secure, no distance far enough to ensure survival, describing how his battalion commanders had been forced to lead from the rear company, commanders to hide among their troops, platoon leaders to remove all distinguishing equipment. Yet still the attrition continued, methodical and relentless, as if the Americans possessed a list of every Japanese officer and were systematically working through it, not knowing that Marine scout snipers had indeed developed detailed target lists based on intelligence reports, aerial reconnaissance, and prisoner interrogations, hunting specific individuals whose elimination would cause maximum disruption to Japanese operations. The psychological warfare aspect of Marine sniper operations extended beyond just the fear of sudden death to encompass a broader demoralization campaign that undermined Japanese military culture's emphasis on visible courage and leadership, as officers who had been trained to lead from the front, to inspire through example, to demonstrate contempt for death, were forced to cower in bunkers, conduct inspections at night, issue orders through intermediaries, behaviors that eroded the respect and confidence of their troops who had been indoctrinated to expect fearless leadership, creating a crisis of authority that Captain Shigetoshi Nakato of the 65th Brigade described as more damaging than the actual casualties, writing that American snipers had not just killed Japanese officers but had destroyed the very concept of battlefield leadership that formed the foundation of Japanese military effectiveness. The Battle of Okinawa in spring 1945 represented the culmination of Marine sniper development in the Pacific War, with scout sniper teams equipped with M1903A1 rifles and unertl scopes operating in support of conventional infantry operations, conducting counter-sniper missions against Japanese marksmen hidden in the ancient tombs that dotted the island, engaging targets in the reverse slope defenses of the Shuri Line at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, coordinating with artillery, forward observers to eliminate Japanese observation posts before they could direct counter-battery fire, and perhaps most significantly, providing overwatch for civilian evacuation operations, using their precision fire capability to eliminate Japanese soldiers who attempted to use Okinawan civilians as human shields, a level of discrimination in targeting that would have been impossible without the superior optics and accuracy of the M1903A1 and unertl combination. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, the brilliant defensive strategist of the 32nd Army on Okinawa, devoted considerable analysis to American sniper tactics in his post-war writings, acknowledging that Marine marksmen had negated many of the advantages of Japanese defensive positions by engaging from ranges where return fire was ineffective, turning the battle into what he called a one-sided conversation where Americans could speak but Japanese could only listen and die, and Yahara particularly noted the impact on junior officer casualties, calculating that American snipers had eliminated over 60% of Japanese company-grade officers by the campaign's midpoint, forcing sergeants and even corporals to assume command responsibilities they were neither trained nor equipped to handle, accelerating the breakdown of organized resistance and contributing directly to the unprecedented casualties among Okinawan civilians caught between disorganized Japanese units and advancing American forces. The technical specifications that made the M1903A1 with unertl scope so effective revealed themselves through captured examples that Japanese ordnance experts examined when possible, discovering details like the scope's internal spring system that returned it to battery after each shot's recoil, the precisely ground lenses that provided edge-to-edge clarity without the distortion common in Japanese optics, the robust tube construction that maintained zero even after severe impacts, the external adjustment system that allowed for precise corrections without removing the scope from the rifle, innovations that Japanese optical manufacturers understood in theory but lacked the precision machinery and quality materials to replicate, especially as American bombing destroyed more of Japan's industrial infrastructure, leaving Japanese forces to face an ever-widening technology gap with no possibility of closing it. Sergeant Major Yoshio Takahashi, senior surviving NCO of the 9th Infantry Regiment on Iwo Jima, described the peculiar terror of American sniper operations during the battle's final phases when Japanese forces had been compressed into the island's northern tip, with nowhere to retreat, nowhere to hide, yet still dying one by one to aimed shots from Marine marksmen who had positioned themselves on the high ground overlooking the last Japanese positions, using their unertl scopes to peer into caves, bunkers, and fighting positions, delivering death through the smallest openings, turning the volcanic rock into a shooting gallery where Japanese soldiers could only wait for their turn to die. and Takahashi noted that many Japanese soldiers began to envy those killed by artillery or flamethrowers, deaths that at least came quickly and impersonally, unlike the calculated selection of sniper victims who might be observed for hours before the trigger was pulled. The intelligence failure that left Japanese forces unprepared for Marine sniper capabilities reflected deeper institutional problems within the Japanese military establishment, including an overemphasis on spiritual factors over material ones, a dismissal of American military competence based on racist assumptions about Western softness and lack of warrior spirit, and an intelligence apparatus more focused on grand strategy than tactical details, missing critical indicators like the Marine Corps' procurement of thousands of unearthed scopes in 1942, the establishment of scout sniper schools at Camp Pendleton and Camp Lejeune, the development of specialized sniper ammunition, details that should have warned Japanese commanders they would face an enemy who had elevated precision marksmanship to an unprecedented level. But these warnings were either not collected, not analyzed, or not disseminated to field commanders who continued to believe their own propaganda about American military incompetence. Private Toshio Yamada, a runner with the 38th Infantry Regiment on Guadalcanal, survived multiple encounters with Marine snipers while carrying messages between isolated Japanese positions, developing an almost supernatural sense for when he was being watched through a scope, describing a feeling like cold fingers on his spine that would cause him to suddenly change direction, drop to the ground, or dive behind cover just as a bullet cracked through the space he had occupied. And Yamada theorized that humans possessed an ancient prey instinct that could detect when they were being hunted, though he admitted this sixth sense was imperfect, watching other runners who ignored similar feelings die instantly from headshots delivered from concealed positions hundreds of yards away. Their last expression one of surprise that death had come from an empty jungle that showed no sign of human presence even after they fell. The M1903A1 rifles that Marine Scout snipers carried into battle had been selected through a rigorous testing process that would have seemed impossibly wasteful to Japanese quartermasters, with rifles that grouped within 1 minute of angle at 300 yards selected for national match competition, those that performed best at matches then evaluated for conversion to sniper configuration, only the most accurate receiving the modifications necessary to mount unearthed scopes, creating a selection process where perhaps one rifle in 50 met the standards for sniper use, a level of quality control that Japanese manufacturing could not approach even for their highest priority weapons, resulting in Marine snipers fielding rifles capable of consistent sub-minute of angle accuracy, while Japanese snipers struggled with weapons that might group within 3 or 4 minutes of angle on their best days. Captain Kenji Yamaguchi, intelligence officer for the 14th Area Army, compiled reports from across the Pacific Theater documenting the impact of American sniper operations, calculating that Marine Scout snipers had accounted for less than 1% of total American personnel engaged yet, had inflicted over 15% of Japanese officer casualties, a ratio of effectiveness that no other weapon system achieved, and Yamaguchi particularly noted the cascading effects of these losses, as experienced officers were replaced by less capable subordinates who were themselves killed before gaining experience, creating a downward spiral of leadership quality that accelerated Japanese defeats on every island, turning what might have been organized withdrawals into routs, planned counterattacks into suicidal charges, coordinated defenses into isolated pockets of resistance that could be systematically reduced by American combined arms tactics. The manufacturing precision required to produce the unearthed scope mounted on M1903A1 rifles represented industrial capabilities that Japanese companies could barely comprehend, with lens grinding tolerances measured in fractions of wavelengths of light, mechanical components machined to thousandths of an inch, assembly performed in climate-controlled clean rooms to prevent contamination that might affect optical clarity, standards that seemed like fantasy to Japanese optical manufacturers working in factories damaged by bombing, using machine tools worn from overuse, operated by workers exhausted from years of war production, creating a quality gap that widened with each month of war as American industry refined and improved while Japanese manufacturing degraded under the pressure of material shortages and strategic bombing. Lieutenant Saburo Sasaki, one of the few Japanese snipers to survive multiple Pacific battles from Guadalcanal to the Philippines, provided detailed post-war testimony about the impossibility of competing with American sniper capabilities, describing attempts to engage Marine Scout snipers as suicide missions where Japanese marksmen were inevitably detected and eliminated before they could determine their opponent's positions, killed by riflemen they never saw operating from distances they could not reach, and Sasaki admitted that Japanese snipers eventually stopped trying to counter their American opposites, instead focusing on closer range targets of opportunity, accepting that the long-range precision domain belonged entirely to the Marines with their M1903A1 rifles and unertl scopes, a concession that would have been unthinkable to the proud Japanese military that had entered the war convinced of their tactical and spiritual superiority. The evolution of Marine sniper tactics through the Pacific Campaign created an institutional knowledge base that Japanese forces could never match, as lessons learned were documented, analyzed, and disseminated through formal training programs, after-action reports, and tactical bulletins that ensured hard-won experience was not lost when veteran snipers rotated home or became casualties, while Japanese military culture's emphasis on individual experience and spiritual intuition over systematic documentation meant that tactical lessons died with the men who learned them, leaving each new unit to discover American sniper capabilities through the same bloody process of trial and error, suffering the same casualties, learning the same lessons that previous units had already paid for in blood. A failure of institutional learning that Lieutenant Colonel Toshio Watanabe called criminal negligence by higher headquarters who seemed more interested in maintaining face than preserving lives. The specialized ammunition manufactured for Marine Scout snipers using M1903A1 rifles represented another technical advantage that Japanese forces never fully understood, with match-grade cartridges loaded with specially selected bullets weighing exactly 172 grains, pushed by precisely measured charges of IMR powder that delivered consistent muzzle velocities within 10 feet per second variation, assembled in cases that had been weight-sorted and neck-turned for uniform dimensions, creating ammunition that could maintain sub-minute accuracy at ranges where Japanese snipers using standard ball ammunition with velocity variations exceeding 100 feet per second could barely keep rounds on a man-sized target. A difference in consistency that meant Marine snipers could rely on their ballistic calculations while Japanese marksmen had to hope for lucky shots at extended ranges. Colonel Masaharu Homa, Chief of Staff for the 14th Infantry Division, documented 27 separate incidents where Japanese positions considered impregnable due to distance from American lines were neutralized by sniper fire during the Palau campaign, describing fortified observation posts on sheer cliff faces picked off by Marines shooting from neighboring islands across water channels exceeding 800 yards, machine gun positions in coral caves engaged through embrasures barely 8 inches wide from distances where the openings were invisible to the naked eye, command posts located in deep ravines eliminated by snipers shooting at extreme angles from mountain ridges, demonstrations of marksmanship that seemed to violate the laws of physics as Japanese military instructors had taught them, forcing a complete reevaluation of what constituted safe distance from American forces. The psychological profile of successful Marine Scout snipers differed fundamentally from Japanese selection criteria that emphasized aggressive warrior spirit and willingness to die for the emperor, with Marines selecting individuals who demonstrated patience, emotional stability, mathematical aptitude, and the ability to remain motionless for hours while maintaining intense concentration, qualities that seemed almost contradictory to military virtues as Japanese culture understood them, creating marksmen who approached their task with the detachment of scientists rather than the passion of warriors, calculating wind drift and bullet drop with slide rules, recording atmospheric conditions in data books, treating each shot as an experiment in applied physics rather than an expression of fighting spirit. An approach that produced consistent results at ranges where Japanese snipers relying on instinct and experience achieved only occasional lucky hits. Warrant Officer Jiro Tanaka of the Special Naval Landing Forces described the experience of being pinned down by Marine sniper fire during the defense of Tinian's airfields, writing that death whispered constantly from the distant ridgelines, forcing his sailors to move only in darkness, to avoid any pattern in their movements, to never remain in one position long enough for American scopes to find them, yet still losing men to shots that came from nowhere, delivered by ghosts who killed without being seen, without leaving trace of their positions, creating an atmosphere of helpless terror where every moment in daylight became a gamble with death. And Tanaka noted that many of his sailors began showing signs of combat fatigue not from artillery or bombing but from the constant stress of sniper threat, the knowledge that any moment might bring a bullet from beyond the range of human vision. The M1903A1 rifle's inherent accuracy advantages over Japanese weapons stemmed from design decisions made decades before the Pacific War, with the Springfield action's controlled round feeding ensuring consistent chambering, the long sight radius providing precise iron sight alignment when scopes were damaged, the robust Mauser-style extractor maintaining positive control of cartridges in dirty conditions, details that seemed minor in peacetime but proved crucial in combat where a single malfunction might mean death, and when combined with barrels manufactured to match grade specifications using the finest steel available, created rifles that maintained their accuracy through thousands of rounds of sustained fire, while Japanese Type 97 and Type 99 rifles began showing decreased accuracy after only hundreds of rounds due to barrel wear from inferior metallurgy. The final Japanese assessment of American sniper capabilities came from General Mitsuru Ushijima himself, who before his ritual suicide on Okinawa, wrote that the Americans had transformed warfare from a contest of courage into a mathematical exercise where victory went not to the brave but to those who could calculate trajectory and windage most precisely, eliminating the human element that had always defined combat, reducing soldiers to targets in a lens and officers to statistics in a sniper's logbook, and Ushijima expressed particular bitterness that Japanese forces had never developed adequate countermeasures, leaving thousands of Japan's best junior officers to die from an enemy they could neither see nor reach, deaths that accomplished nothing except demonstrating American technical superiority, a reality that contradicted everything Japanese military culture believed about the nature of warfare and the value of spiritual strength over material advantage. The legacy of Marine Scout snipers armed with M1903A1 rifles and 8-power unertl scopes extended far beyond the actual casualties they inflicted, fundamentally changing how both American and Japanese forces approached infantry combat, forcing acknowledgement that individual marksmanship at extreme range could influence battles as decisively as artillery or air support, that a single well-trained sniper could paralyze entire units through selective elimination of leadership, that technology and training could overcome courage and determination, lessons that would influence military doctrine for decades after the Pacific War ended. Though for the Japanese soldiers who faced these invisible killers across the island battlefields from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the primary lesson was simpler and more terrible, that death could come from anywhere at any time, delivered with surgical precision from distances that seemed impossible, by an enemy who had turned killing into a science that no amount of Bushido spirit could defeat. The captured diary of Sergeant Hiroshi Matsumoto, found after the fall of Saipan, contained perhaps the most eloquent Japanese assessment of facing Marine snipers, writing in his final entry that the Americans had stolen the soul from warfare, turning it into nothing more than mathematics and optics, where a man's life was worth less than the price of a single bullet, where courage meant nothing if you could be seen through a telescope, where honor had no meaning when death came from beyond the range of any possible response, and Matsumoto concluded with a bitter observation that would have been heresy before the war, that perhaps the Americans were right, that war was not about spirit or courage but simply about killing the enemy as efficiently as possible from as far away as possible, a realization that came too late for the Japanese military that had staked everything on the superiority of their warrior tradition over American technology and industrial might, never imagining that the United States Marine Corps had produced warriors whose skill with a rifle exceeded anything the samurai tradition had ever conceived.